Welcome, welcome, everybody. Where are you guys coming in from? Welcome. I know I am from Chicago, by the way, so I might be a little biased to Chicago. I'm just gonna put that out there. Even though I currently do live in Dallas, but I'm always gonna be a Chi-Town girl. Okay, Hanover, DC. All right. Oh, we got California. I am slightly jealous. We won't even talk about the weather there, okay? Ooh, Scottsdale. Nice. Okay, Harrison, you don't have to rub it in now. You don't have to rub it in. That's just not even right. Not even right. Okay, New Orleans. Woohoo! I just came from there actually a couple weeks ago. Welcome, welcome, everybody. As you're coming in, make sure you put where you are hailing from. Okay, now, Rachel, you just want to rub it in? That's fine. And Rachel co-signed Harrison. That's what that is. Okay. That's fine. Just because it's hot here, it's fine. I may be sweaty even though I got air conditioning on in my house. It's okay. It's okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Tori. Somebody understands my pain, okay? Somebody understands 110-degree weather. I completely get it. Completely get it. All right, we got Virginia. We got Kentucky. Yes. Oh, 111 degrees. Okay. I think Susan has us all beat at this point. I won't complain anymore. I will not, right. I will not complain, Susan. You got it. You got it. Okay, we got Arizona. Ooh, South Carolina. I didn't realize that. It's getting hot. So they say global warming is not real. We all know that that is not the case, right? We know that that is not the case. All right. So as everyone continues to put where they are in the chat, it would not be an amazing town hall if we didn't have a Minty moment, right? And so there's either two ways. You can use your phone and you can just screen there and click, or you can also just go to minty.com and put in that code. So that is what we'll use for our Minty moment. And we'll give you guys a few minutes to respond to that. Is it working for us, Harrison? Are we getting people? There we go. Rachel
Yeah,
said,
we
can we?
got about five people. Just want to
Okay.
give it a few more moments.
Let's go back to the last slide so we can kind of see the question too for those, for
Oh
others.
yeah, yeah, of course.
So the question is, what is the most important issue for you headed into the midterm elections? I know there's a lot, right? There is a fun fact that you can put more than one into the Minty. And so if you feel so passionate about that, feel free to put more than one issue. But I know there is a lot happening and headed into for these midterm elections. Because that's what we're here for, right? Democracy is what's at stake. So I wouldn't be surprised we see a lot of the voting rights that are there. All right, Harrison, you want to share? There we go. All right, let me see if I can put mine in here too, because I'm passionate. Okay. I am definitely passionate about this midterm election. We have a lot at stake. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, but we definitely have a lot at stake. Ooh, yes. That's what we're here to talk about. Voters' rights. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm looking, I don't know about you, but I am definitely looking forward to the panel. We have some amazing, amazing panelists. You guys are in for a treat. Healthcare funding and capacity. Absolutely. Yep. That's one of the pillars for us is that mass incarceration for dream.org. Ooh, AI and data centers. Absolutely. 100,000%. Ensuring harmful bills are not passed. Absolutely. Some people are putting into the chat, saving our democracy. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you can't get into the Mentimeter, you can feel free to put it in the chat as well. Yep. You know, it wouldn't be technology if something didn't happen. Okay. So I definitely understand. If you can't get in, I was like, but definitely put it into the chat if you can't log into the Menti. We want to make sure that we get and capture all of these responses. Yes, getting people out to vote. Absolutely. Registering folks, mobilizing. So, so important. Ooh, permitting reform. Okay, I like it. I like it. Ha! Getting enough votes to impeach Trump and force the Republican Party to do on about the face of their racist, anti-American agenda. We got some passionate people. I love it. I love it. There we go. Civil rights, citizenship, ICE, healthcare. Yes. School to prison pipeline, so important. Housing, public schools, HBCUs. Okay. Housing subsidies, low income productions. Absolutely. ICE at the polls. Yes. Legalizing January 6th. Listen, we got a lot of passionate folks. Environmental justice, all things that are extremely, extremely important. I really, really appreciate you all being honest and open about this. I know we have a lot that's happening. So, without further ado, I am very, very excited to introduce not only someone who is obviously going to be introducing the panel, which is important, but this was her vision. She is very passionate about this. She has immense amounts of experience in this, but she also happens to be one of my most amazing colleagues. Her name is Rachel Payton, and she is our Senior Director for Communications and Marketing. Welcome, Miss Rachel.
Thank you, Danielle. And I would be remiss if we did not formally introduce our beloved Senior Director of People Operations, Danielle Davis. So thank you, madam, for being our introduction host today. Harrison, if you could go to the What's at Stake slide. I'm really excited about the conversation tonight. Really excited about introducing our panelists to you all. But we want to set the tone for why we are here tonight. Tonight is the first of a series of town halls called Democracy: What's at Stake. A lot of you have been hearing and seeing about voting rights being under attack in the South, and there's a lot of other issues: public health and public safety, housing rights and affordability, energy, utility costs, AI, democracy. We will be having additional town halls throughout the summer covering some of those topics. But tonight, we want to set the tone on what is happening with voting rights. So, we have a wonderful representative from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund who will talk a little bit more in depth about the Louisiana versus Calais case. But largely, districts throughout the South, Republican majorities, are trying to redistrict in their states so that they are stripping power away from predominantly Black communities. Currently, right now, there is 30% of the Congressional Black Caucus that is at risk of losing representation. In addition to that, this is not an issue that only affects Black communities. There are 11% of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that is at risk of losing congressional representation. So they are taking a predominantly Black and brown communities that are predominantly Democratic voters and splitting them into Republican majority voting districts, which means that there is a total of 41% of Black and brown congressional representation that is at risk of being wiped away. That is 41% of Black and brown congressional representation is at risk. They are attempting to remove that in our House and in our Senate here in Washington, D.C. So even if you're not in Georgia, where today they are having a runoff election, tomorrow there's a special section to redistrict and to mimic what has already happened in Louisiana, what has already happened in Tennessee. Even if you are not in Alabama, where the Supreme Court has approved a 2023 drawn map for the 2026 midterms, which erases its second majority Black district and reverses a previous Supreme Court decision that already said that it was illegal. Even if you are not in Louisiana, where the governor has signed a law that erases the Black majority district of District 6 in Louisiana, where Black voters are headed to federal court to fight back. If you're not in these states and if you're not in the South, their representatives in the House and Senate, they vote and contribute to federal and national policies and regulations that happen in our country. So this intentional shift of Black representation, Black voting power, this intentional removal of our representation in Congress affects everybody, whether you're in the South, North, West, Midwest, wherever. And truthfully, even if you're overseas, because it also affects the decisions that we make about how we trade internationally and when and where we go to war as well. So I wanted to make sure that I take time to emphasize this. Thank you all for being here, as this is an important conversation. So without further ado, we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to start to introduce our panelists as they get ready. So first off, I am introducing George Chidi, who is the politics and democracy reporter at The Guardian. He's covering particularly politics within the Southeast. So he's writing about election integrity, voting rights, and the intersection of race, criminal justice, and public policy. He's written for a lot of other outlets prior to The Guardian, including The Intercept, Rolling Stone, Slate, Vice, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, among many others. And a fun fact, he began his journalism career in the U.S. Army, where he served as a military photojournalist and reporter. So thank you, George, for being here, and thank you for your service. Then you can say hi, George. It's okay.
Hi, George. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Then we have Tori Wenger, who was or is rather a Louisiana versus Calais SCOTUS attorney organizer representing the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Tori, as I mentioned, is an attorney and manager of the Black Voters on the Rise initiative. Within this program, Tori coordinates a team of Legal Defense Fund staff working in coalition with national, state, and grassroots partners, engaging in year-round voter education, election administration advocacy, and election monitoring efforts, predominantly in the South. At LDF, Tori also contributes to collaborative litigation, policy, and research efforts, and she's litigated multiple voting rights and redistricting cases, advocating for Black voters to have fair representation and equal access to the political process. So Tori is really going to give us some insights on what happened and what is happening with the Louisiana versus Calais case. Hi, Tori.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Then we have Sean Wilson, my colleague, my teammate here at dream.org, Senior Director of Organizing and Partnerships, where he leads capacity building and strategic partnerships that ensure the communities too often left behind are connected to the tools, opportunities, and resources that they need to survive. He previously directed the ACLU of Wisconsin's Smart Justice campaign. He's taught in Marquette University's Education Preparedness Program, which helps students impacted by incarceration access higher education. And these roles, along with his own personal lived experience with the justice system, influence his leadership and organizing initiatives here at Dream, like the Dream Justice Cohort and the Justice Next Cohort, which have trained and mobilized more than 100 directly impacted leaders to organize, advocate, and win policy change across the country. Shout out to Sean. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I was about to ask Harrison if he can play my theme music, but in the interest of time, I'll hold back on that.
Thank you, but we'll make that a note in the debrief. And then last but certainly not least, I'm very excited to have a new communal relationship with this young man, Rob Richardson, who is a well-known Louisiana criminal justice advocate and the co-founder of his organization, Rich Family Ministries. Rob Richardson, as mentioned, is the co-founder of Rich Family Ministries, where he and his wife Sybil founded after enduring and surviving 21 years of incarceration in the state of Louisiana. Their organization, Rich Family Ministries, was created to change lives and change laws through love, and I will add also through legal education. He is well known as the subject of the Oscar-nominated documentary Time, which came out in 2020. and it chronicles he and his family's fights for justice in the face of extreme adversity. And another fun fact, he is also a member of the 2026 Dream Justice cohort at dream.org this year, which we are celebrating 5 years of the Dream Justice cohort. So this is a really special year for that cohort and that program. And that is also one of the major programs that Sean from dream.org leads. So thank you, Ra, for being here and also for being a part of the Dream Team as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for having me.
Of course. All right, y'all. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have questions that pop up, please drop them in the chat. And then as time permits towards the end, we will circle back to some of those. To get started, I'm going to start with Tori. As I mentioned, you were a part of the legal team. You are currently a part of the legal team that is fighting against the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act, excuse me, not just in Louisiana, but on the federal level. In Louisiana, can you walk us through the Calais case at a high level? Explain for us what exactly did the court decide and how is this impacting Black political representation?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for having me, and thank you too for teeing us up with some grounding background on the Calais decision and what it's meant in other states to kick off this call. So Louisiana v. Calais really started as a case about Louisiana's congressional districts, but it has become so much more consequential for the future of the Voting Rights Act writ large, for the future of our democracy, not just in Louisiana and for the clients who I represent and work so dearly with, but for Black voters across the nation, for other communities of color, and for anyone who wants us to actually have a multiracial democracy in the United States. So this saga honestly has endured many plot twists and turns. Calais is just the latest iteration of what has been many cases since the 2020 census, and in fact, decades of litigation around who is able to hold and exercise political power in the state of Louisiana. But I think we also need to think about it beyond just that legacy of litigation in Louisiana around congressional representation, but within this more recent legacy of what the Supreme Court has done to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we in the civil rights community and any kind of scholar of American history would lament the Voting Rights Act is truly thought of as the crown jewel of the civil rights movement, of everyone who marched and sacrificed in the 60s to finally realize the promise of a multiracial democracy and to try to hearken in the end of Jim Crow voter suppression. And so that legacy was celebrated for decades, yielded actually having a Congressional Black Caucus, having representation not just on the federal level, but in local school boards, and having people be able to exercise their right to vote and register and not need to face poll taxes or jelly bean tests or anything else that we saw as these types of tactics of suppression. And in the redistricting context, what we call vote dilution, or the idea that districts can be drawn and manipulated in a way that makes some people's votes count for less because they have no real hope or opportunity to see the candidates of their choice elected to office. So what Calais has now done is essentially completed a trifecta from the Supreme Court in piecemeal efforts to undermine the Voting Rights Act's racial justice protections, dating back first to the Shelby County decision in 2013, which effectively rendered ineffective the preclearance protections, the proactive provisions that made it so that before discriminatory maps or before discriminatory policies could go into effect in the states with the worst legacies of suppression, the federal government could stop them. So that Shelby County v. Holder decision was that first kind of gut punch to the protections of the VRA, specifically the proactive ones. But after that, then we saw the Brnovich v. DNC decision, which took aim at the safeguards that Section 2 of the VRA provided in allowing litigants, Black voters often, but other voters of color as well, to challenge discriminatory policies that would lead to the wholesale denial of their right to vote. Something like discriminatory voter ID laws, closures of polling sites in Black communities. These tools that litigators like myself were able to utilize in the courts through Section 2 to file cases on behalf of voters who are facing vote denial. But now, fast forward to just this year, what was it, last days of April or something? It's been a total just plot twist of rapid response since. Fast forward to this year, this term, this Supreme Court and the harm that they've done, we have the Louisiana v. Calais decision, which I could talk at length about in terms of the procedural background and posture, but really the headline here is Louisiana v. Calais is the final blow to the Voting Rights Act and its racial justice protections, now taking aim at how the VRA was able to address what we call vote dilution, that idea of unfair mapping or districts that are drawn and manipulated to deny Black communities a fair shot and real hope at being able to elect their candidates of choice. And so with that, we've seen this kind of culmination of about, just over a decade and change of this Supreme Court undermining the legacy of the civil rights movement and that crown jewel protection of the Voting Rights Act, first with Shelby and now most recently with Calais.
Thank you, Tori, and thank you for that background too, for people that may have just been getting introduced to this battle during the Louisiana case. But the fact that we've been fighting for this, I mean, truthfully, since the Voting Rights Act was passed, but even since then, the fight to protect the Voting Rights Act has been constant. So that's important to note as well. George, I'm coming down your lane next. You have been covering through The Guardian, redistricting battles all across the South, including some of the states that I mentioned earlier. Recently, you wrote about your visit to Memphis, Tennessee, which we might have some Memphis folks in the chat. But you visited Memphis after their Tennessee State House redistricted the only Black majority district of Memphis, splitting them into 3 historically Republican majority districts. In your writing about it, you saw firsthand the close proximity of power and prosperity, which I thought that you articulated very well. You also wrote that some of the people in these neighborhoods that have been redistricted in Memphis, some of them already felt underrepresented before state lawmakers, as you wrote, cards up the consequences of their votes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how working on that story made the immediate impact of redistricting so tangible for you?
Yeah, a privilege to talk about it, I have to say. Memphis gets beat up on a lot and unfairly, I think, after being there and sort of experiencing the city. The racism of the way they split up the districts is unmistakable once you go there and look around and then look really closely at the map and where they drew the lines. They literally split the district along a railroad track. And I made a point of looking at an old 1930s redlining map of Memphis. That's where bankers and the federal government would designate certain neighborhoods for Black people and like where they would not loan money to people who wanted to go buy housing there. And the way they split the districts up matches the lines that were drawn in 1930. Like, and I find myself looking at that like, did they do that on purpose? Or did they simply look at the way Memphis is today, knowing it was, whether or not they knew whether it was shaped by those lines, and drew it like that anyway? Like the legacy of racism is so baked into the city. Like one of the things you learn as you're really like digging into Memphis is how racially striated it is. It's not just to say, oh, here's a Black neighborhood. Oh, here's a white neighborhood. Like it's street by street in some places. And so those neighborhoods can find it difficult to advocate for themselves in a unified voice because there's actually a lot of racial diversity, even in a majority Black area. Um, The benefit of having one circle drawn around Memphis where you've got to have one representative is that you get the average of all of that. Like right now, like you have this disjuncted city where nobody in the city is going to have a voice in any of the three congressional districts. They split the black community almost exactly in thirds, while leaving 78% of white Democrats in one district. That's not that's not a coincidence. That's just how it goes. Um, and yeah, like so they had representation issues at the local level before this. And now, I mean, people are really openly saying, well, why should I bother voting? Memphis already has a low voter turnout problem. Like the question is whether or not the obviousness of the racism here will be enough to spur Memphis voters into overperforming and maybe changing some results.
Yeah, it's a layered issue, especially depending on, the city and the state that you are in for sure. Thank you, George. And speaking of the layers and the intersection of voting rights, I'm going to transition over to Rob, who I mentioned is a well-established criminal justice leader and advocate in his community in Louisiana, and we argue across the country. In your short documentary with the New York Times, you talked about how the U.S. is the incarceration capital of the world, and Louisiana specifically leads the nation in incarceration, which is the state in which you were incarcerated as well. Now, Louisiana has been made the example of the attempted disintegration of Black voting rights. So, as someone who personally is really living at the intersection of criminal justice and democracy in Louisiana, criminal justice and felony disenfranchisement, what do you make of these intersections, and can you provide some more color about how these issues overlap in real life?
Great question. I would have to say that, just as, just I think it's important to really identify what the intersection is. And when you think about when your dignity and your rights and your ability to be able to participate in the process, I think that either when they are either being restored or when they are being taken away from you, I think it's at that moment that you reach the intersection. And for a person like me that was formerly incarcerated, that overlapping, part happens. I think that when you find yourself entangled in a system, entangled into a scenario, and you can't do anything about it. The laws that were already in place were in place, in the way that they were, and there was really nothing that I could do about it. As a person that goes off and commits a crime, crazy enough, the 13th Amendment comes back into full effect. You're pushed back into a condition of slavery. And with that being said, you pretty much give up or you forfeit all of your rights for transgressions. And with that being said, like I said, it's just really it's a hell of a place to be in when people are making decisions about you. And when you think about an incarcerated person, you're talking about a person that is really feeling the blunt impact of laws that are being made that are about them, but yet they have no participation in the process. That's a heck of a place to be in. But unfortunately, I found myself in that scenario for more than 21 years and 4 days to be exact, before I was granted clemency. And then I would say that when you ask about the overlapping of such, the overlapping I think happens just on the reverse of that. When you now find yourself back into a scenario and there's no help. I got back home after 21 years and 4 days, and there was no one there. By and large, I would say the bulk of my family, kind of met me with some level of scrutiny, because they were, some of the first things they said to me was, get a job and don't go back. as if though I just spent 21 years in prison and now I'm excited to go back. When I met first with my parole officer, 72 hours after being released from prison, there was no encouragement about how to get a job. There was no encouragement about how to find housing. None of those things were there. He barked at me pretty much as if though he was the correctional officer that I had just left in prison. And so, with that being said, he viewed me with a lot of suspicion. And so, with that being said, it doesn't make for the best scenario or situation for a person that's coming home that is trying to restore oneself, that is trying to regain their dignity, that is trying to re-exercise their rights. A person that is looking to participate in that process. You can see it probably most recently. We talk about the Calais situation, but here just with our state government, we have a person here in our city of New Orleans, Calvin Duncan, and a formerly incarcerated person who experienced a great deal of what I just spoke about earlier, and that is that a lot of his petitions were being held up at the moment of the criminal clerk. He ultimately was able to overturn his sentence, got out, obtained a law degree, participated in the process, overwhelmingly won the office for the criminal clerk, and then less than 4 hours, they wiped out his position. And so when you see that overlap, like I said, it just continues to play out because you spend all of your life trying to get back the things that had been taken from you. And it was never that you were kicked out as a system, out of the system. But the thing is just the flim flam was there since 1965 when they came up with the 13th Amendment. They created this exception clause. And then, the trickery happens again, and you find yourself back in that scenario. And it's an ongoing battle.
Rob, I have a follow-up question for you.
Hmm.
It's my understanding that in the state of Louisiana, once you finish your entire time, including any probation or parole you may have, you are legally able to register to vote and to vote. Um, However, it's not as simple as you're allowed to vote again. So one, just make sure that I'm correct in that. And then two, what are some of the barriers that keep people who are coming home from incarceration? Like, how do we get them engaged in the voting process and feeling like that is something that they should be doing?
Hmm. Just a correction on the front end. There's your answer was right in part, and then part of it needed correcting. The part that you were right in is that if you satisfied your entire sentence, then yes, your voting rights are restored. If you happen to come home like myself after spending 21 years in prison, sentenced to a 61-year sentence, that means that I have another 40 years that I have to satisfy on parole. So during the time that I am on parole, as long as I complete up to 5 years of that sentence, then I can now re-register to vote if that registration was, done away with during my period of incarceration. But that was just something with some of the justice reforms that happened probably in the last maybe about 2 or 3 years before I got out of prison. So you're talking about around about 2015 to 2016 that they implemented that practice to where after 5 years you would be able to get back involved in the process. But all too often for people that I see that are coming home from prison, voting is probably the furthest thing away from their mind because they're all the way in survival mode, trying to figure out how to get the job, trying to figure out now if you're like me. I went to prison 2 years on the other side of Windows 95. So by the time that I had come home, MySpace was a thing and no longer a thing by then. It was like I had become, like the Flintstones moving into the world of the Jetsons. Things that exist when I was previously moving about. Those things, had totally changed. And so there was a learning curve, that was there. So it was much like, again, being thrown into a foreign land and you don't speak the language. And so there's a learning process that happens. And in that learning process, again, like I said, voting is not necessarily, if you're not conscious of it, that is, voting is not necessarily something that's high on your list of things to do. And so those jobs, housing for some people, permanent housing, that is, because many people that discharge, they go to transitional home. and you can't stay at the transitional house forever. At some point in time, you have to be able to find housing, and then there are other issues there because a lot of apartment complexes, for instance. Um, they have strict rules and practices as it relates to allowing a formerly incarcerated person to become a resident of the apartment complex. If you're a person that has sex offenses, there are certain neighborhoods you can't live in without planting a sign in the front yard saying that you are a person that was, a sex offender of sorts. But all of these things serve as barriers in your efforts to try to regain your rights and trying to regain your life post having been incarcerated.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking
Hmm.
of the housing rights piece, we do some advocacy work around the Fair Future Act. Shout out to our Pennsylvania-based Empathy Network lead, Yusuf. We will be having another conversation later this summer exactly about that housing rights for justice impacted folks and also housing affordability. So shout out to Yusuf. Sean, I want to transition to you. You are on the Dream.org team, as I mentioned earlier, building organizing power in states like Louisiana, all over the country, working with other people, local leaders and advocates who are justice impacted, so that other folks can not only have a seat at the table, but have the means and the resources to build their own tables and shape systems and policies that actually rehabilitate individuals and at the same time keep communities safe. So, can you talk about how the work that you're doing in organizing through Dream and the folks that are coming through your cohorts, how is that contributing in the fight against felony disenfranchisement specifically? And what are some of the most common concerns, kind of piggyback into Rob's comments, what are some of the biggest concerns on the ballot box specifically for people with that lived experience?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think just jumping right into and adding a little bit more sauce to Rob's question as it relates to felony disenfranchisement. I think justice impacted communities or individuals in general are disenfranchised long before they get to the ballot box, right? They're disenfranchised when it comes to economic opportunity. They're disenfranchised when it comes to housing. There's so many ways in which justice impacted individuals are disenfranchised. But I think the work that we're doing here at Dream.org, I actually would argue that organizing itself is a form of fighting against felony disenfranchisement, right? At its core, organizing is about helping people recognize their power. And in recognizing their power, they're able to exercise collectively. But when we look at felony disenfranchisement writ large, I think we have to understand that that is one of I would say that is one manifestation of a larger challenge, right? Too many people have been told that their voice doesn't matter. Too many people have been told that their past prevents them from moving forward. And too many people have also been told that their involvement with the criminal legal system disqualifies their voice, right? And as somebody who has spent about 17 years within the carceral system, as someone who understands that it's easy to internalize that type of message. And so here at dream.org, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is we're building that agency. We want to make sure that we're developing our leaders through our Dream Justice cohort, our Justice Next cohort, and also through organizing communities around legislative change, right? We want to make sure that we're supporting people and sharing their stories and help them move from the margins to decision making and to the margins of move from the margins of decision making to the center of it, right? So yeah, we fight felony disenfranchisement by ensuring that system impacted individuals have access to the power and the resources that they need to fight against it. But more broadly, we fight against the idea that anyone should be excluded from shaping the future of their community as a result of their past.
And then going into midterms across the state and really even looking at 2028, the presidential election, what are some of the biggest like intersectional issues and concerns that people are going to the ballot box who are justice impacted? What are some of the things that are top of mind?
Yeah, I think justice impacted individuals, we're not single issue voters. I think um for the most part, I think we care about many of the same things that everyone else cares about, right? Safe communities, good schools, affordable housing, healthcare. Many of the folks who joined this webinar mentioned a variety of things that they are concerned about. And as of lately, some of the conversations that I've been having with justice impacted individuals all across this country, surprisingly, has been around data centers, right? Why? Because many of these data centers are popping up in Black and Brown communities, and many of these justice impacted individuals come from those very communities. And so we care about the same thing that everyone else cares about. The difference is that many of us have experienced firsthand what happens when systems don't work, when systems fail. And so I think that we don't have one specific issue that we're concerned about. We're concerned about all of them.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you. Tori, I'm coming to you next, but I also want to give a shout out to Robert Wood. I saw you in the chat. He is another Dream Empathy Network legend. So thank you for being here tonight, sir. Tori, last year, almost exactly a year ago, July 2025, you wrote about 60 years of the Voting Rights Act and the renewed urgency of integrated advocacy. What exactly are the integrated advocacy lessons of the past that we urgently need to lean into today? And also, are there any ways in which we need to pivot from what you wrote a year ago? Are there any adaptations or is there any evolution to the strategies that you propose?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that question. There's a few case studies that we could talk about, in fact, endless ones. But I'll go back to what I was speaking of before the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 as just one emblematic moment for where integrated advocacy and the idea of using multiple different tactics for change rather than staying in our silos of, litigators over here and organizers over there, strategic communicators in this corner and policy folks, just at capitals and not in communication with the rest of us. We don't get the Voting Rights Act without each one of those dimensions. We needed the march from Selma to Montgomery and all of the try and stop efforts that led up to that day to be able to have the critical communications moment, the eyes of the world on the US, witnessing the violence that marchers experienced on Bloody Sunday, on the bridge in Selma, and then the final execution of having people descend from across the nation to march together, organized, calling for that passage, to then be able to deliver the policy result of that bill. But in the background, we also needed the lawyers in the court. It was LDF that filed the litigation that allowed the marchers to have the permits to actually do that march. But what can litigators do if they don't have the clients with the claims? What does any of this mean if we don't have the communicators who are utilizing the media in all of its different fashions, whether it was, just the one or two stations that existed then, or the myriad platforms that we have to navigate now, and the types of people who are our messengers in this moment. And it's not just cable news in many ways. It's, it can't be just those like core media platforms that were ushering this language through in 1965. So that is kind of one moment in time that we had to respond to. But we also were in a completely different landscape with the federal courts. We were in a completely different landscape with who was in the White House, who was in Congress, what our resources were, what they weren't, etc. But I will say that in this moment, the Calais decision and having a decision that has taken us backwards in incredible juxtaposition to LDF's other cases like Brown v. Board of Education, which took us forward, or in the policy wins like the passage of the Voting Rights Act. It is still a moment where now more than ever, perhaps, we have to be flexing each one of those muscles. We have to be building that muscle memory of how in the moment of a litigation in a court setback, do we use that as our momentum for an organizing or a messaging opportunity to truly have folks engaged? And I'll use another more recent case study of how this is all manifesting. I was one of the legal team members on Calais, had to do a lot of legal briefing, writing. There was a hat that I had to wear for that during the whole case and in the aftermath. But like many other folks at LDF and our clients, the communities that we serve, the coalition, and grassroots partners that we work with, like Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, the state conference of the NAACP, or in other lanes, groups like Black Voters Matter, etc., we didn't have a moment to just kind of try to heal our litigation wounds or mourn a really horrific case for anyone who cares about the law as an institution and our rights as the fundamental kind of pillar of having a true and fair multiracial democracy. There was no kind of time to take a moment and just process that in the silo of a Supreme Court case or a litigation matter. We immediately had to pivot to now what do we do to frame this for folks to understand, to respond to how this could deflate voter morale, what this means at the ballot box, what this means in community. But then also, as we saw, the immediate consequence, whether it was in Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, right, tomorrow, Louisiana, was that legislatures were acting. And we had to have an integrated advocacy approach to immediately be able to mobilize and record build and stake our claims in the legislature. But again, that takes having the information of what happened in the court. What does the decision mean? How does it impact? How does it reframe how we're discussing these issues, how we are framing our arguments, what maps and districts we are advocating for now? All of that had to be integrated between our policy frameworks and our litigation frameworks. But one thing that I think also kind of speaks to a point of hope in a pretty dismal moment for the case law, for the legacy of the Voting Rights Act, is that this was, in Louisiana, one of what has been years and years now of legislative sessions, whether it was special session or the regular session that they were in, where community had to mobilize in a united call for fair maps. And I have been so just impressed by the community testimony, the young people, the elders, everyone who's shown up back since the road shows that they had all across the state in 2021, the special session they had in 2022, the special session they had in 2024. But never in that window of experience, let alone the decades that I know a lot of folks closer to this work and in and of Louisiana can speak to, have we seen people stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning to testify to the Committee on House and Governmental or the Committee on Senate and Governmental Affairs to make their case for fair maps. We've had incredible testimony for years. We have had people flood the hallways of the legislature, but never until we were in this crisis moment did we have that type of organizing mobilization, which is in and of itself a policy record, a legislative record, a court record for whatever cases or history will flow out of what happened as well. And that's where this kind of integrated advocacy or this idea that any litigation loss is an organizing opportunity. Any organizing opportunity builds a policy record, which then flows into the next court case. This is not the first time LDF has had to represent Black voters demanding fair maps in Louisiana, let alone across the South and other places in the nation. But we can only do it effectively and with the type of endurance that this moment requires and our legacy foreshadows without having all of this integrated advocacy type of expertise and commitment, even when, if not especially, when we have setbacks like Calais.
Yeah, that is true coalition work. And we rely heavily on coalitions and dreams work, especially for our state campaigns that we do across the country. I do also want to note, who was it in the chat? Edna Gooch. If you all want to take a look at her comment, she shared her contact information. If there's anyone else that is interested in collaborating, Dream is always looking for particularly justice impacted folks, but people that care about the justice impacted community and the conversation that we're having today. Would love to stay in touch with you. And if you see somebody else that is sharing similar comments that you resonate with, feel free to also exchange contact information with them, because we can actively build coalition as we are talking right now. So we don't want it to just be a panel. We want this to be a virtual community collaborative experience. So thank you, Tori. Thank you, Edna, for throwing your information in the chat as well. George, I'm going to come back to you with your reporting. So unlike places in Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida, which I didn't know what I'm about to say, and so I started looking this up. South Carolina, and then George also fact checked me, but South Carolina rejected redistricting in a special session recently, which would have split up incumbent Congressman Clyburn's Democratic majority district. So, like I said, unlike Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida, who did split up the black vote in those states, South Carolina actually denied it in a special session. So, George, in your reporting, what do you think was the differentiator in what happened with South Carolina redistricting versus these other states?
So there are two factors that I think are important in South Carolina relative to the other states. The first is that South Carolina has a fairly substantial black population and non-white population that is not evenly distributed. Um, or I mean, that is somewhat more evenly distributed than Memphis. Like almost every black person in the state of Tennessee lives in or near Memphis. And Tennessee only has about 10 or 15% black population. Um, it's more like 25% black in South Carolina, plus another 15 or 20% Latino and Asian, and they're much more widely distributed. It's part of the reason why Representative Clyburn's district is so geographically spread out. Um, it was an extraordinary, I'm pausing for a moment because the majority leader in the state Senate, his name is Massey, and I'm spacing on his first name, um, Republican. But he gave the most persuasive speech I have ever heard in my life from a Republican talking to other Republicans, saying why redistricting is a bad idea. I would actually encourage anybody who's looking for a lesson in rhetoric to go find this thing. Um, and his argument, like, really boiled down, aside from like the big moral questions, which he addressed, um, was saying, look, we're actually likely to give up two districts rather than get one. If you take black voters out of Representative Clyburn's district and put them in like the first congressional district, we're probably going to lose both of them. And instead of going 7-0, we're going to go 5-2. Um, that's not necessarily the case in Georgia, at least not with Sanford Bishop's, you know, district in South Georgia. Pretty sure they can redistrict that without worrying about losing a seat somewhere else, even in a year like this. Florida, I think, has bitten off a lot more than they can chew. I think that they have dummy mandered. I'm going to call it right now. They're not going to get everything they thought they were. They may be at the status quo when this is over. Um, but that dynamic in South Carolina, Alabama resembles that in a lot of ways, and they may end up screwing up in Alabama. Um, Shamari figures might actually win a redistricted seat. You know, we'll see. Um, but the dynamic in Tennessee is much different.
Thank you for that. Um, I don't know if everybody else was aware, but like I said, that's an interesting comparison. So thank you, George, for really outlining that and the demographics. I will also add that common ground here at Dream is really core and central to our work. And sometimes it's difficult work to try and find common ground with people that are at different spots on the political spectrum. But to your point, George, there's something that we could possibly take away from State Senator Shane Massey's remarks and disposition in regards to redistricting that possibly can be replicated in other places. So I personally, as a comms person, will be looking up his remarks as well. I'm going to ask a question for specifically Rob and Sean, and then we're going to open it up just a little bit for Q&A. Rob and Sean, for people that have been either incarcerated or justice impacted, who may not feel like their voice counts in this matter, it's complicated. It's a lot going on. They already didn't want you to vote, and now they don't want everybody in your community to vote. What do you say to them directly? What do they need to understand about their voting rights? and how do we make sure that they are informed and involved at this table?
I was going to defer to my brother, um, uh, but I'll hop in. I think that I would tell folks, don't self disenfranchise themselves, right? I think oftentimes too many people count themselves out before anyone else does. Um, I think the first thing that people have to do is learn their rights. Many states across the country are very much different when it comes to voting rights. So I would tell people to understand their voting status, and get involved in the electoral process. Right. Oftentimes, people don't feel that they are able to contribute to that process. But I want to remind people that voting is one form of expression, one form of power, and organizing is all about how we build that power. And so I would tell folks to, join organizations who are involved in this space, and get educated on what is actually happening in their respective cities and states and across the country. I'm often reminded, and I've been reminded of this the last couple of months, the last couple of weeks, that we've seen all of these things transpire, um, from Dr. King when he sat in the Birmingham County Jail, and he said that a threat to justice anywhere, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but he said something along the lines that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? And so I think that we have to be ever mindful of the threat to justice that is happening all across this country, right? That is impacting every last one of us, right? What is happening in Louisiana can easily happen here in Wisconsin. What is happening in Tennessee can easily happen in DC. And so I think we have a collective responsibility, to get informed, to get activated, and ensure that we are collectively supporting each other as we navigate uncertainty. But the opportunity that exists in this moment of uncertainty is the opportunity to step into your leadership. And in moments of uncertainty, what do people need more than anything? They need leadership. They need vision. They need guidance. They need direction. And I think this is an opportunity for not only just justice impacted individuals and communities to step into that agency, but everyone within the sound of my voice and everyone who's paying attention to what is happening all across this country.
Thank you, Sean. Stan in the chat provided the quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And so, as you said, Sean, should we be ever reminded of that as we go about our day to day? Tori, Dream Tori, if you could bring all of the panelists to the spotlight, I have a quick round robin for all of you. What is one thing that you think everybody in this chat should do in the next 30 days? One thing. And then Tori and Harrison, if we can make sure all the panelists are pinned. I think they might be hard to tell, but anybody want to jump in?
I'll be real quick, short and simple. Let this radicalize you. Yeah, don't retreat. It's time to organize.
I would piggyback on what Sean is saying, and that show up locally and protect the vote. One of the biggest things that I found is just that when you understand that you are in a system where the majority rules, specifically in places like Louisiana, where the largest cities are predominantly black. New Orleans is predominantly black. Baton Rouge predominantly black. Shreveport predominantly black. Monroe, Lafayette, Lake Charles, Alexandria, a lot of those areas are predominantly black areas. And when you understand that majority rules, the likelihood that your vote will carry weight at the local level can definitely be significantly felt. at the local level. So I would urge people to focus a considerable amount of your attention at the local level, because I think at the end of the day, it's where you feel it the most.
Absolutely heavy on local politics and local community, local engagement, the church, the barbershop, the corner store, wherever you frequent, wherever your face is at, get engaged somehow. Whatever you're interested in, whatever your hobbies are, whatever your skills are, there is a role for all of us. George, Tori, do you want to add?
Yeah. Um, hear the sorrow in my voice. I don't think a lot of what we're looking at will be reversed until we have a new president, and a president who is willing to make this probably the most important issue that they address with their presidency, like a willingness to shut down the government in order to see proper reforms made. I also don't think that we are going to see this happen without a type of mass resistance that is reminiscent of what we saw in the 50s and the 60s. And I hold my breath and I ask myself whether or not this country, black voters, this country overall is prepared, politically prepared spiritually for what will be necessary. It's not going to look like 1950 and 1960. And I honestly think that it will require economic disruption that most Americans are uncomfortable with. Um, and I think a shift is necessary in our thinking in order to get to the place where that kind of power can be demonstrated outside of political. Like there has to be a threat to the political system in order to reverse this. And that threat is not likely to be political, it's likely to be economic.
Yes. I just want to let that sit. Tori, you want to chime in?
Sure. I would say right now, especially as we're anticipating November, as many legislatures are no longer in session, but they will be again next year or in special sessions in the month ahead. As we are anticipating all of this build up for other opportunities to engage civically, I would use the next 30 days to pick who your accountability buddy is. And maybe you're a super voter and you vote every single time, but you've never gone and testified at your state legislature, or you haven't actually researched all the offices or the other issues that are down ballot, or you've never gone door knocking before. Pick your accountability buddy right now, that person who, with you as their kind of partner in this effort, would get that gumption, the bravery to do something a little bit out of your comfort zone, but as urgently needed as ever to fight back for our democracy. Pick them now, get your text thread going, make some like marks on the calendar, decide how y'all are going to reward yourself, whether it's your favorite snacks or, your guilty pleasure show you're going to binge ever, but make sure you know who your accountability buddy is, whether it's for November, for the next census, for the next legislative session, for the fight for the life of our democracy. Pick your buddy, because when it is hard, we get through this with community. We get through this in knowing that we are on the right side of history with the best folks ever, and we would choose no other team. So go spend these 30 days, go through your contacts list, pick at least one, but preferably even more, and start making those accountability commitments to really kind of stretch and flex your civic engagement muscles in ways that aren't going to be comfortable, but that's how we build our strength, is by increasing the weights, is by doing things that make us stretch. We got to get out of our comfort zones, but the way to be brave enough to do that is by having people who are going to do it along with us.
Absolutely. And Tori, I'm gonna push you on the spot. I want to get at least one Q&A question before we wrap from Yolanda in the chat. The question is, what's the panel's thought on reteaching civics and using the lesson to bridge why voting is important in this moment, especially? Many people are tired and the fire needs to be relit, which I feel resonates with a lot of what George, Rob, Tori, and Sean are also saying. But Tori, if you want to speak a little bit more to that.
Civic engagement is absolutely fundamental, is so core to the work that for LDF, the Black Voters on the Rise team does. So while I litigate, really my job is leading a team of a bunch of non-attorneys who are trying to do that civic engagement work, who are training election protection volunteers, who are partnering with HBCUs, with educators, with any and everyone who is willing to inform community members and be those real trusted spokespeople in and of their own communities to talk about civics and to equip them with the voter education tools that they need, with the historical grounding. Absolutely, you're spot on in terms of what we need in this moment. And LDF has a lot of resources for that, but we need the reach of partnerships like Dream, of all of you to be able to spread the tools, whether it's the historic resources and grounding that our Thurgood Marshall Institute provides, whether it's the trainings and resources that our Black Voters on the Rise team can equip you all with. We have to start with that foundation, the civic education. And I think we can learn from history, but we also have to meet this moment and look to a rising generation of young folks to glean what they can from that education, but also to push us all further to readopt and renewed call for what this moment requires and what the future will demand.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you, George. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for the dream team, Tori, Harrison, and also Danielle, who welcomed us all here tonight. We will be following up via email with some resources. And then in 2 weeks, we are coming back for a conversation, particularly about public health and public safety, what's on the ballot there going into the midterms, and again, looking ahead into 2028. We have some more conversations on housing rights and affordability, AI and democracy, and also energy opportunity in the South. So as we mentioned, there's a lot of intersection happening with these issues, and it all also directs right back to voting rights as well. So thank you everyone for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again. Thank you.